The act gave the police sweeping new powers. It didn't mention Islamists specifically, but there was little doubt about who it was aimed at.
Argument initially, obviously, I supported.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Like their religious brethren everywhere, Toronto's Muslims start their day by answering the first call to prayer. The city is home to the highest concentration of Muslims in Canada. Saeed Raghi is a charismatic young imam who preaches at Toronto's Abu Huraira Centre. After 9/11, he says Canada's Muslims felt marginalized, that suddenly they were all under suspicion. He says Muslim leaders didn't know how to react.
Well, some of the leaders would say women should take off their hijab for the fear that she would be hurt. They did not say, let her stand on her feet and say, we didn't do it because Islam is not allowing this. Muslims in North America are not allowing this. So I should not, come down and change my religion or my views just because of one incident. Others, they were saying, change your names. Change your names. My friend's name was Osama. And he went to this leader, and the leader said, change your name. And he had to change his name. This other guy's name was Muhammad. They say, nowadays we're not safe. Change your name. Now, taking off the niqab, taking off the hijab, changing names. Men, they said, shave your beards. If you have a beard, get rid of it. If you used to wear kufi, lose it. If you had a name or you have La ilaha illallah on your car, the bumper of your car, or sticker, remove it. Change your identity. Do not let anybody know that you're Muslim.
The lead agency dealing with terrorism in Canada is CSIS. 10 years after 9/11, Canada's leading intelligence agency still regards Islamist terrorism as the #1 threat to national security.
To say that now, decade plus since 9/11, now that Osama bin Laden is dead, that Anwar al-Awlaki and others have been killed in drone strikes, to suggest that the threat environment has been reduced. I'm up at the coalface every day, and I look at that threat environment, and it's not getting any better. I wish I could say it is, but it's not.
Newly married Sajid Ali and Arshin Devji have had to put up with the fear and suspicion ever since 9/11.
Common Muslims, common, regular, everyday people.
Doctors, engineers, nurses,
those
teachers,
have nothing to be afraid of
students.
at all. They've become apologetic. Every time there's some kind of bombing that goes on, right away they have to run and say, I hope it's not the Muslims. And then if it's a Muslim, then it's like, oh my God, okay, we deny, we are not a part of this. We have to make a whole big hoopla over the situation.
The Anti-Terrorism Act passed by Parliament in the wake of 9/11 is still a sore point with many Muslims and their supporters.
And so in panic, in a gross overreaction, and in undermining some of our long-standing values and principles and rights, we passed that back in late 2001, coming into effect in the year 2002. The average Canadian would have said...
Joe Comartin, the NDP's justice critic, and his NDP colleagues opposed the act because it took away fundamental democratic rights, such as the right of an accused to trial in public and the right to remain silent. Then, in June 2006, the image of Canadian Muslims took another hit. In a dramatic takedown, the Mounties swooped in on 2 young men unloading hundreds of bags of what they thought was ammonium nitrate fertilizer. The fertilizer was to be the main ingredient in 2 enormous truck bombs. By the time the bust was over, RCMP had arrested 18 Muslim men and boys on terrorism charges. The arrest divided Toronto's Muslim community. At first, some believed the Toronto 18, as they became known, were just a bunch of boys arrested on trumped-up charges. Toronto lawyer Faisal Kuti represented one of the accused.
The media coverage was just unbelievable from my perspective, because I think it was highly sensationalized, exaggerated. A whole bunch of media crews out in videotaping the homes of the family members, basically zooming in and openly exposing where these individuals lived. And then also the over-the-top, I believe, reaction of the police in the initial arrests, in the way, I think in some cases, I would not be exaggerating to say that the only thing lacking in some arrests was there were no tanks on the street. And I think that had a huge impact on the community in kind of marginalizing and alienating the community.
Journalist Natasha Fatah couldn't disagree more. Fatah says the media didn't exaggerate the danger posed by the Toronto 18. It was too kind.
We knew something was about to bubble to the surface, and I'm glad that they got caught. And I'm glad they got caught before something really bad happened. But because I was traveling, I work as a journalist here in Toronto, and I thought, oh man, I wish I had been at home to work on this story with my team and to have gotten the most information about this breaking story out. But when I got back home, I was actually surprised at how the media had managed this story. They had made these 18 young men victims. And I found that incredibly troubling. I'm not saying they're guilty or they're innocent, especially at that time we didn't know, but the overly favorable and sympathetic manner in which the stories of these young men was reported, I found incredibly troubling.
At the trial, Crown prosecutors played a grainy black and white video of a winter training camp where young recruits were given military training. The most shocking piece of evidence was video shot by an RCMP explosives team. The RCMP team had made a bomb using a set of instructions found in the Toronto 18 leader's apartment. Assistant Director of Intelligence Ray Boisvert is one of the highest-level officials of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Boisvert knows that Muslim leaders accuse CSIS of damaging the community's image. He says CSIS tries to be sensitive, but still has a job to do.
So we have a group of individuals at a Toronto 18 that rejected the fundamental principles that you and I and the vast majority of Canadians ascribe to. How did that happen? We're still not 100% certain. We spend a lot of our time investigating and analyzing the elements of radicalization. One thing is true, and it's that it is a case of mostly young people who are either looking through a sense of adventure. They're looking, they're more easily affected by a message that is well communicated.
Toronto's downtown core is clearly visible from a Muslim neighborhood known as Crescent Town. 10,000 people live in 6 towering high-rises. They are a diverse group. The majority come from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the countries of South Asia and the Middle East. Many here feel the Toronto 18 damaged the image of the whole community. They already felt marginalized by the anti-Muslim reaction after 9/11. Even so, the parents are grateful they are giving their children an opportunity to receive a Canadian education. They also want their children to maintain their own cultural values, which are much different from the mainstream Canadian lifestyle. It's a difficult balancing act. During her 12 years as principal, Tammy Ross has worked hard to break down the barriers between the children and parents of Crescent Town and the rest of the city.
What we try to do is deal with a lot of the issues that we have and questions that parents have through our learning center. And here in the library, I've brought some samples of some books that we have here. These are trade books in different languages, so we quite often will have a story that is a Canadian story or a European story or an Indian story, whatever it might be, and we'll have it translated in English and in another language. So parents who don't speak the language, who don't read the language, will understand what the children are reading. So we have them in our languages from our school, the 52 languages from our school.
Our group, not me and my group. Our.
Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3. So you guys are back in. Okay, slide down. That's it. Okay, now you're back in.
Every afternoon, when the weather is fine, Malik Bakhtiar takes his 4 young daughters to the park. Malik's wife died 6 years ago from a sudden brain aneurysm. He was left to raise them on his own.
लोग समझते हैं कि जो लोग मुसलमान मस्जिद में जा रहे हैं वो टेररिस्ट हैं, नमाज़ पढ़ रहे हैं। तो इस तरह से आप अगर देखें तो क्रिश्चियन जो चर्च जा रहे हैं तो वो भी फंडामेंटलिस्ट है, वो भी टेररिस्ट है। फिर अगर जो हिंदू जो है मंदिर जा रहे हैं तो वो भी फंडामेंटलिस्ट है। जो फंडामेंटलिस्ट मीन ये है कि प्रे करने वाला, जो प्रे कर रहा है वो फंडामेंटलिस्ट अपने रिलीजन के तौर पे है, वो टेररिस्ट नहीं है। आप लोग जो है इस चीज़ को जो बताते हैं लोगों को कि ये प्रे कर रहा है, ये हिजाब पहना हुआ है, तो ये टेररिस्ट है। ये टेररिस्ट कैसे है? अगर कोई सरदार जो है पग बांध रहे हैं तो वो टेररिस्ट हो गए। अगर हिंदू वो जू जो है वो अपनी टोपी पहनते हैं तो वो टेररिस्ट हो गए। मुसलमान अगर हिजाब पहन रही है तो क्या वो टेररिस्ट हो गई? नहीं, लिबास तो एक उसकी सखाफत है, उसका कल्चर चला आ रहा है।
Every day after school, Malik teaches his girls the Quran. His deepest desire is that they will grow up to be good Muslim women. But he is equally determined that they learn to fit into Canadian society. A task made more difficult, he says, since 9/11. Even though Crescent Town is located in the heart of Toronto, the community is so isolated most Toronto residents know very little about the people who live here. The young boys of Crescent Town study the Quran and pray at a local after-school program on weekends. Their teacher, Wazir Mohammed, says the values of peace and compassion they will learn from their religious studies will make them good Muslims and good Canadians.
Many of the students who come here, most of them are from South Asian. They came from Bangladesh, they came from Pakistan, and they're going to school in this community. In fact, most of them started at Crescent Town School here, and they are coming here in our class where we teach them about Islam, to be true Muslims.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
They should respect their teachers. They should help their parents and respect their parents, because their parents came here for their good, actually, for a better lifestyle. And we teach them that they should not be involved in crimes and so on. We encourage them to study. And we encourage them to be active in the community in terms of sports, volunteering, and different activities that will make them more healthier and active young people to contribute towards the society.
They want them to maintain their heritage, which is what we want as well, but they also want them to become really wonderful members of Canadian society. And the kids embrace it. They're very, very respectful of teachers, and that's something that we know comes from home. So we've tried to develop a partnership between the families and the school, because that's how we'll make sure that these kids are successful.
Like parents everywhere, the parents of Crescent Town worry about their children. But it's not easy to help your kids when Canada doesn't recognize your professional qualifications, and it's difficult to find a good-paying job. The local member of Parliament is Matthew Kellaway.
You have kids growing up in these communities, and as I said, to my perspective, seem like happy, well-adjusted kids, but these are kids growing up in homes where parents are struggling and are frustrated, and even have a sense of betrayal about this country, because their parents that came over were brought into the country because of skills that they had, under the assumption that there was going to be a use for those skills in this country, that they could be meaningful participants in growing Canada and our economy. And kids are watching that frustration, that hopelessness, and you have to wonder how that's going to impact on them.
In a nearby neighborhood, an immigrant family has arrived at the next step in the immigrant experience. Ahmed Mustaq and his 3 little daughters came to Canada more than 20 years ago. Mustaq found work as a tax accountant. He is very proud that his daughters are all university graduates.
My 3 daughters, Andalib, she studied architecture. But she hasn't finished yet. She had a baby, so she lives in Vancouver. Other 2 daughters, one lives in Stouffville, Sabrine. She is working in TD Bank. And the youngest one still lives with us. She is an immigration officer. And so we feel proud of them because they are getting the value of Islam and they are doing the professional job.
Ibtisam Mustaq attended the University of Toronto. She was an active member of the Muslim Students Association, the MSA for short. She says sometimes she felt like an outsider.
There was a huge fight with pretty much the whole university against our MSA, and they said we were having problems and we were asking too many demands for halal food and this and that, and they gave us halal food at a restaurant and we had higher demands or something. So basically there was a conflict. It wasn't a really good time. There was low morale, I guess, amongst the Muslims at the university. But I mean, that was one incident, and we dealt with it the best we could. We tried to communicate with people and tell them what we wanted, and that we didn't have great demands. We were just trying to live a Muslim lifestyle and be at the university at the same time. So we did the best we could.
After wearing it for 10 years, Ibtisam decided to take the hijab off.
I don't wear hijab anymore, and it's been less than a year since I did take off hijab, and it was a really, really difficult and personal decision for me. It doesn't have to do with the backlash I felt from people saying you can't do this. Actually, when I started wearing hijab, my mother was really afraid for me. She kept saying, don't wear hijab. You're not going to get anywhere professionally. People are going to judge you for it. But that made me even more determined to prove myself, to wear hijab and go do these things out in the mainstream society. So when I did take off hijab, it was more for personal reasons. I felt a spiritual disconnect with Allah or with Islam, and I'm trying to reestablish that. And I hope to one day wear hijab again, inshallah.
Judy Rebick is a well-known feminist and political activist who has written extensively on Canadian minorities. She sees the hijab debate as a manufactured controversy.
The hijab has been made into a symbol. You know, lots of women wear scarves. I mean, don't forget, a generation ago, nuns covered their hair completely. And there's still religious practices like Hasidic Jews. Women wear wigs to cover their hair. So there's other religions that cover their hair. So it became a symbol of the oppression of women, which goes along with terrorism, right? That all Muslims oppress women and they're all terrorists, and you know, that whole dialogue.
Like most newly married young couples, Sajid Ali and Arsheen Devji have their eyes firmly on the future. Ali has a degree in engineering. Arsheen is a university graduate, and now she is pregnant. It's a dream come true, but looking back to their own experience during the last decade, they already worry about the difficulties they face raising their children in a society where their religion is under suspicion.
A lot of hijabis feel that in order to compensate for the fact that people might think there's a gun under here or something, that they have to be really friendly. Really friendly. And a lot of the times, like as somebody that wears hijab, you feel it. You feel that people are very unfriendly. And it's a result of the media. It's a result of people like Stephen Harper going on the media and seriously saying that Muslims are a threat. It's a result of this, that they're unfriendly. They're scared. Then you have to be, you feel that you have to hold open door. Like you make extra efforts to do these things just so that people will know that, you're nice.
When I was born in Pakistan, when I was growing up there in the 80s, nobody wore the niqab. I never saw a woman in a hijab or a niqab. I saw women in Indian clothing, shalwar kameez and saris. Now you go over there, everyone's wearing a black tent everywhere you go. It's terrible. What's happened in the last 20 years is the rise of Wahhabism, which is a very distinct branch of Islam, is very fundamentalist, very dangerous, that's that believes that it's the only path to God. And that's what's spreading. Somali women didn't always wear hijabs. You know, Indonesian women didn't always wear hijabs. You think Bosnian women walk around with niqabs? Like, this is a lie that the West has bought into, that this is what those people wear and we should just respect it and let them wear it. It's not right. If you see a 6-year-old girl in downtown Toronto wearing a hijab, there's something sick about it. It's wrong, because fundamentally a hijab is supposed to cover a woman's sexuality. If you think a 6-year-old girl is a sexual being, you're sick. And you're the one who needs to cover your eyes and not make a little girl wear a hijab.
The Toronto Star has won awards for its coverage of the Toronto 18 case. Haroon Siddiqui is an editorial writer. Over the years, he has written on Islamophobia and is a frequent critic of the Stephen Harper government. Siddiqui thinks the hijab-niqab controversy is a trumped-up non-issue.
Government floated this idea of banning niqabi women from casting a ballot. So it has populist kind of appeal. Oh, we need to see the face. How would we know there's a fraud? Excuse me, that's fine. That may be a valid argument. But 70,000 Canadians vote by postal ballot in every election. They vote from all over the world. Nobody ever sees their face, right? So there's a greater danger of fraud there than there is in this case. And the 5 women who will vote, in fact, have to satisfy the election officer that they are who they say they are. So this is nothing but sort of whipping up fear constantly.
In a recent interview with CBC's Peter Mansbridge, Prime Minister Stephen Harper voiced his concerns about national security.
There are a number of threats on different levels, but if we're talking about terrorism, I mean, the major threat is still Islamicism. There are other threats out there, but that is the one that I can tell you occupies the security apparatus most regularly in terms of actual terrorist threats.
This is not the Canada that I always thought Canada was. Even though Canada, it was still like a relatively racist place. I was relatively, I felt like a bit of a foreigner here growing up. But it is not this bad. You know, kids are kids on the playground calling you Paki, but your prime minister on the TV, and prime ministers, I mean, they don't mess up. They're not supposed to mess up in their speeches, like these little details. Like, don't they have speech writers, or don't they have people to advise them on this? Like, this is something that's, again, it's trying to scare the Muslims.
When the Prime Minister says Islamists are the biggest threat to Canada, people hear Muslims are the biggest threat to Canada. Anyone who believes in Islam is a threat to Canada. So first of all, that's irresponsible. And second of all, it's patently untrue. First, there isn't much of a threat to Canada from anywhere. I mean, nobody, there's not much of a threat. And we've only had one case where in the case of Muslim terrorists. The biggest terrorism we had was Air India. That's where more than 300 Canadians were killed. So did they vilify all people from India or Pakistanis or whatever? No, they don't, because that was a particular group of people who did that, and so was every other act of terrorism. But what they've done is they generalize it to all Muslims. That's the problem, and that's where Islamophobia comes from, I think.
That we have nothing to do with.
We have nothing to do with it.
Like, for example, September 11th, we have nothing to do with. But this 10th anniversary came, and when I was in Edmonton and the whole community, and we did a whole soup kitchen thing. All the Muslims band together, and we did a soup kitchen on September 11th, on Sunday, to show the rest of the community that we, students, young people, it was all young people, Muslims, are not terrorists. This is that inferiority complex. We have to prove we're not terrorists. So many people join things like Terry Fox Run and Run for the Cure. What is that? Breast cancer run that's going on in Toronto right now. Just to show that we're not terrorists.
Dr. Shireen Razak is a University of Toronto sociologist and an internationally recognized expert on the politics of racism.
Governments make decisions and do things that produce a real stigma for groups. So in that sense, the conservative government has been committed to a kind of security agenda that definitely results in the stigmatization of Muslims. Are liberals a lot better? Not very much. They're all committed to the same idea that in the name of security, we can take away people's rights. So in that sense, both parties have been just about the same. The difference is power. Who's in power and what are they able to do?
Well, I think Harper wants to build a security state. I think he wants to build up the army. He's, for the first time in my life in Canada, we have a glorification of the military. We've never had that in Canada. The military's always been peacekeepers, and we've never glorified wars. He's glorifying the War of 1812 of all things. And he's building prisons, and even though the crime rate's going down, and he's talking about terrorism, even though there's really very little threat of terrorism to Canada. And he's doing all that to build up a strong security apparatus, which is what every neoconservative government has done. I mean, look at the Bush government. They went into a huge deficit to build up the army even more than it already was. So I think he'd like to build a military-industrial complex in Canada, and he's using every excuse he can to do it. Whether it's phony stats on crime, or making people afraid of crime, or making people afraid of terrorism, so that he can impose his agenda, political agenda. It's very ideologically driven.
Imam Ahmed Kuti is one of Toronto's longest-serving and most respected imams. Kuti says the period in which new Muslims arriving in Canada had to devote their efforts to building mosques is over. He says now the priority must be teaching their children how to use Islam's universal values to become good Canadians.
And people hate Islam because they misunderstand it, because they have seen some Muslims in the name of Islam committing bloodshed. This is the problem. And we need to distance ourselves from those people who use Islam for violence and political purposes. Islam is a universal message which teaches us peace and tolerance and compassion and justice. So to overcome Islamophobia, we need to teach our youth and children what real Islam is all about, how they can transform their own life and to become ambassadors of Islam. Because Prophet ﷺ, his method of da'wah was through character, the way he interacted with people. And this is how Islam spread in many parts of the world.
The ongoing argument among Muslims even today is the role played by this man in the Toronto 18 affair. His name is Mubin Sheikh. The RCMP paid Sheikh almost $300,000 to spy on the Toronto 18. Some regard him as a Muslim Judas who betrayed his own people for cash. Others think he did the right thing by helping to bring down a dangerous, homegrown terrorist cell.
I understand, the Muslim community, because they feel that they are under siege. For them, for somebody to expose the wrongdoings of the community, in the mind of the community, this person is making the community look bad. And this is a mistaken thinking, because what makes the community look bad is a bunch of guys running around claiming they want to do jihad.
And in this particular case, from my experience, from my perspective, there were a number of individuals who I think kind of crossed the line in terms of just basically not just gathering information and preventing something from happening, but basically pushing it on or egging it on or facilitating it. Okay, and I think that's when you cross the line.
NDP justice critic Joe Comartin says not only is the use of paid informants usually unnecessary, it's a slippery slope that leads to bad policing.
The reality is that the communities, you don't need to bribe people to do this. You don't need to put spies in there. If they identify that there is that kind of activity going on that could lead to violence, or people advocating violence, they voluntarily talk to the police. Whether it ceases the RCMP or the local police force, they do that. And that's a much better way to have a society, a secure society, a safe society.
Where we can collect information openly, we'll do that first. And that includes knocking on a lot of doors. I've had the occasional advocate suggest to me that people feel intimidated about what the service does, and they come knocking on their door and they show their identification card and they say, we'd like to speak to you. We're from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And my response to that has always been, I make no apologies for that. That's the very Canadian approach to doing our business. We could covertly and secretively, and we do occasionally where we have to, where our level of covert activity has to be commensurate to the level of the threat.
There are terrorists all over the world. These days they happen to be Muslim. Yesterday they were Hindus in the case of Tamil Tigers and so on. And previously, in a previous generation, they were Jewish people, and so on and so forth. But that does not mean that all Hindus are terrorists, does not mean all Jewish people are terrorists, does not mean all Muslims are terrorists. And we need to distinguish these 2 points consistently. But there's this narrative that Muslims are all terrorists. All Muslims must apologize for all bad Muslims. This is the worst kind of propaganda. So we should not be surprised that Muslims don't want to talk to you.
When we're talking about racial, ethnic, or even religious profiling, it's an unfortunate thing. I don't feel 100% comfortable with it myself, but unfortunately, I think we live in a time where we have to do it. We have to do it. We've got an international ideology propagated through young Muslim men to carry out acts of violence, and Muslim converts to carry out acts of violence. So we would be dishonest to say that, everyone should be treated equally. We know who's strapping bombs to their underwear and to their shoes.
But Professor Shireen Razak sees racial profiling as fitting into a disturbing pattern.
What is interesting is that anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim racism have a lot in common. They have proceeded along similar lines in the sense that religion and race gets mixed up, so you can't really tell what is happening here. Is this discrimination on the basis of religion, or is this a particular form of racism? So there are a lot of historical similarities and some very disturbing ones. For example, when a right-wing intellectual like Daniel Pipes should suggest that all Muslims wear numbers on their arms, that's a really scary, it's a right-wing, out of the ballpark kind of solution. But boy, does it ever recall the Holocaust. It's very ironic. And will we get to that point? I sincerely hope not with Muslims. But for some people, that is definitely where we should be going.
Toronto's Ismaili Muslims are known for the unique liberal interpretation of Islam and their business acumen. Their spiritual leader is the Aga Khan, who has carried on his father's practice of giving generously to charity. But even the Ismailis seem to fear the anti-Muslim backlash that still resonates long after 9/11. Although they allowed us to film their celebration, they declined our invitation to do an on-camera interview.
They are afraid of being in the eye, they are afraid of being nailed by the RCMP, they are afraid of the media, they are afraid of politicians. In fact, that they are afraid is not an indictment of those people. It's an indictment of all of our society. It is like the Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. They were afraid. So were they wrong to be afraid? No, because we were doing awful things to them. This is the same thing that happened in the 1950s in the United States during the McCarthy era. You're a communist, and people were afraid. People did not speak up. Hollywood is full of stories of how great producers and so on could not muster up the courage to speak because they were afraid of being nailed. They were afraid of sent off to jail, or being demonized, or being called a communist. It's the same thing going on here. In fact, we should all hang our head in shame that Canadian Muslims feel this way. It's not an indictment of Muslims. It's an indictment of the Canadian community that we have made them so afraid. That's the real issue here. And then what happens is you get another trick. One of the tricks is, I said, the Islamophobes talk the language of equality and liberation and so on. The second clever trick they have, they go and find 5 Muslims who are willing to attack other fellow Muslims. He's a progressive Muslim. All of you are crazies. He's a progressive Muslim. He has the courage to speak. Nonsense, he has no courage to speak. He is an opportunist. He's coasting on the media's prejudices. It doesn't take any courage to piss on Muslims these days. It's the easiest thing on earth. It takes courage to stand up for them. It takes courage to stand up for minorities.
We're not social workers. That's not our role. We're not. Our job is not to get distracted on issues or things that are outside of our core responsibilities. We're an investigative agency, and we investigate threats to national security. But we do that in a way that we hope is rather sophisticated. In other words, and I said at the outset, we do things as openly as possible, and we engage others to have better understanding of the issues. And that happens through trust, it happens through engagement, and it happens through a dialogue of equals, where people understand that, yes, we have a role, and we're here to exercise that role, and you have every right to walk away and not speak with us or not engage with us, but I think we'll both be the lesser for it. So we try to communicate that message. So we engage with the RCMP, and usually under the auspices of Public Safety Canada, who's the normal convener for these type of events. We've done so in a number of cities across Canada. And quite often we've had tremendous success. We've had large groups and we've had good discussions. Sometimes the dialogue can become, some individuals in the audience want to express their anxiety or their anger, and we listen and we pay attention. But in response, we try to explain this is why we do things and this is how we do it as best we can.
A joint CSIS-RCMP outreach meeting at a community center in Mississauga near Toronto shows there's still a lot of work to do. The CSIS officials had no objection to us filming the proceeding or having their faces shown. But the Muslim organizers did not want us to film the faces of the audience. We were allowed to take a few pictures from the back of the room, but after a few moments, we were asked to leave. The pressures felt by Toronto's diverse Muslim community are unevenly distributed. One factor is skin color. Imam Saeed Rarge emigrated with his family from Somalia when he was a child. It's not often you see an imam playing basketball, but Rarge is a harbinger of a younger, hipper, Canadianized Muslim leader. He says the backlash after 9/11 just added to the list of reasons Toronto's Muslims sometimes feel marginalized.
Let us take my family as an example. My wife, she's a Reaver. She's a European Reaver. She's white Canadian. I'm not. When we come together, we have two different experiences. This is her country, and I came to this country. It's two different things. When we deal with the non-Muslims, number one, when we walk together, they say, this is the common question, did you travel to Africa and that's how you accepted Islam? Because a lot of European Canadians don't believe that a European can become Muslims. Or they will say, did he force you to wear that thing that you have over your head? What they need to understand, we are from different parts of the world, but we are one nation. We have different backgrounds, different cultures, but what unites us is the religion itself.
Ergin Gulbey has had no problems adapting to Canada. He moved to Toronto from Turkey 7 years ago. He is a white Muslim.
All my life I spent music, and I came to Canada. It was a new world for me. I didn't know much about Canada, like almost nothing. I came to learn English, and after I come, I noticed that Canada is a beautiful country. For a Muslim person, it's easy for you to practice your religion. It's easy to participate almost every kind of event. People are nice to you. I don't remember facing any problems about discrimination, honestly. And like I said, I came here 7 years ago. I made my own family here. Now I have a son. I met my wife here. Yeah, I hear about some stories from other Muslim friends and brothers, some Asian Muslims, African Muslims, that they have faced some difficulties, but myself, I've never faced one.
In addition to working in construction, Gulbey is a talented musician. He's also a practicing Sufi. Sufis believe they can communicate with Allah, or at least the spirituality of Islam, through music and dance. They are the legendary whirling dervishes of ancient folklore. They can spin for hours on end, working their bodies and minds into a state of religious bliss.
There is a genuine form of Sufism, which is the heart of Islamic spirituality, which is the essence of Islam. Because Islam is not merely laws or shell, outward things, actions. It is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, relating to Allah and also relating to the creation of Allah. And Sufism teaches excellent morals, excellent character. It is refining your character, refining your heart. And this is the essence of Islam. But having said that, we need to distance ourselves from those who use the name of Sufism for propagating their own hero worship, cult, introducing into Islam innovations that are forbidden in Islam. Real spirituality will save us from extremism, from fundamentalism, from this rigidity, from this fanaticism. Because when your heart is purified and you use connection with Allah, the love of Allah, love of Allah's creation, your character will be gentle, beautiful, because we are to qualify ourselves with the beautiful attributes of Allah. That is the essence of tasawwuf.
Rasulullah said to Bilal Habeshi, also his crown on our head, who? The black slave. And when he said, go Bilal, call people to the prayer, the way the dreams have been seen according to this Sahaba who they all told the same dream. He says, yes, Ya Rasulullah, thank you for letting me to do that. And Bilal Habeshi went, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. With a crying voice, with opening his heart and throwing all the deities away. He calls people to prayer by praising Lord, but with a praising mind, heart, mouth, and everything. In a musical form. Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah, ya Allah. Wa'fu anna ya Kareem, wa'fu anna ya Kareem, wa'fu anna ya Kareem.
So Muslim leaders, they need to get together and say we need to influence the policymakers and be involved with the politician. There was a time that a lot of scholars, a lot of da'is would get on the minbar and would talk about this and say, to vote, to deal with the politics is haram. You cannot be part of this. This is evil. I would say, yes, lying is evil, deceiving is evil, cheating is evil, but you can be a Muslim politician, honest, decent, trustworthy, and as a matter of fact, not only Muslims, this is what the Canadians need.
Ray Boisvert says Canada's Muslim community is not a threat to national security. The threat comes from a handful of extremists.
The evidence of ongoing attack planning and ongoing proliferation of the most negative messages that have emerged in the last 2 decades with respect to extremism continue. And in fact, the numbers of those the numbers and the sources and the venues for those types of messages continue to grow, which therefore we conclude there'll be more and more persons who will be affected by that. The reason there have been no successful attempts is because we have been extremely vigilant. We do our job. We try to do it, of course, though, in a most balanced way.
Any criticism that I make of the country, and I say this anytime I speak, I say this anytime I meet with intelligence people or government people, I say anything I'm saying here which is negative or which is critical is being offered as constructive criticism. So we can repair those damages, repair those, those things that are wrong to make it a better country. Right? And so in that kind of spirit, what I think that we need to do is to engage with people around us.
Solidarity is a kind of two-way street between equals. You can't assume that somebody is inferior and coming from an inferior culture and then expect to have some kind of dialogue. That's not going to work. So I think what we have to do is create the conditions of communication that make it possible for us to actually sit down. Among feminists, for example, we need to sit down and think about what are the problems that women are having. We need to be able to talk to each other across these differences. And I think we can, but we must abandon notions of a clash of civilizations. We must abandon saving, civilizing, before we can sit down and have this conversation.
Many Muslim Canadians feel that even though 9/11 was the work of a tiny handful of fanatics, in the eyes of many Canadians, the Muslims are all suspects.